Hello, and welcome to this new episode of Hessian Scrum. Joining me today is Herb Burke from longtime death metal veterans Drawn and Quartered, as well as vocalist on Vetus Obscurum. So, recently, thank you for joining us, Herb.
My pleasure.
You recently released Congregation Pestilence with Drawn and Quartered. That's done kind of very well. It shows that you guys still have something despite it being album number 8 at this point.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. I mean, we still think that we can do, things with our musical form that are interesting to listen to. And, we're trying to make music that we like. And so hopefully other people will like it too.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you guys have gone a lot more melodic this time around, a lot more leads and solos and
Well, that kind of, at least in my opinion, sort of comes and goes. And sometimes it's a lot more the circumstances of the record. There's, for most of our records, maybe not the first couple so much, but after that, definitely started having some, more melodic leads here, like, especially on Hail Infernal Darkness. Definitely this, this album's a real variety of songs. So there's some, there's some melodic parts there that, might not be on another record just because of how the material itself is, that it just kind of lends itself more to that than, a different song, basically.
Yeah, because, you said just now that, the melody comes and goes, but, I noticed on your second album, Extermination Revelry, there's quite a bit of melody there as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's always been an aspect of our music. Like, the To Kill Is Human, that's a little bit of a different style. That's just so really like just intense and relentless. So there isn't a lot of room for it. But after that, there's definitely more room for more for more melodic stuff. And so definitely on Extermination Revelry, maybe not quite as much on Return of the Black Death, although there's still some there. Hail Infernal Darkness, that's one where it's really like, that's lots and lots of layering and leads and just atmospheric stuff. It's really like really killer.
Yeah, over the years, you've mainly been the vocalist, but on a few recordings, you've played bass here and there.
Yeah, well, it's been basically a development since we lost Greg, since he left the band in 2008. Actually, like just before the end of a tour we were doing in the US. Hooray. But I'd basically like, played a little on the side, had started playing bass in a side project. And so we took a little bit of time, like just regrouped as a trio. And I've been the bass player since then. Basically on the recording of The One Who Lurks, Kelly played bass, but that's kind of more of due to the circumstances of the recording than anything else. So
yeah, do you feel it allows you to kind of have more input in the composition, compared to like only being a vocalist?
Yes and no. I mean, Kelly is really more the songwriter. It's not that I wouldn't want to contribute, but my main contribution is the lyrical end of things. I think Kelly's really, he's really good at, he can come up with riffs for days, basically. So there isn't a lot of need for for other people to pitch in. So that aspect of it isn't as much of a thing. I've always been involved to a degree in like, input on arrangements and, suggestions about, this and that, those sorts of things. But, Kelly's usually been the driving force behind he comes up with most of the riffs and, driving force behind the composition. Sometimes songs that come together more organically. Some of the more recent things have been more ideas that he's fully formed, and then sometimes they've been elaborated on just a little bit, while rehearsing them to record or what have you.
That's very good. Quite recently, I found your first demo, Drawn and Quartered, which was the songs did become, To Kill Is Human.
Mm-hmm.
But it's insane. Yeah. I mean, how young were you? How did it all start? And how did you get to that demo? And, just that evolution between the demo and the first album is insane.
Oh, yeah. Well, young, definitely. Not super young because we're, kind of old. Early 20s. We kind of started. I guess, let's see, I guess it was probably that one we were starting in the early 90s, basically in, 92 or whatever. Both of our respective first bands were kind of getting going. And then both those lineups fell apart after our first shows. And we kind of ended up joining forces and formed Plague Bearer. That was actually his band beforehand, but we kind of regrouped that, and that was the forerunner to Drawn and Quartered. And so that lineup, of course, didn't last very long either, because that's how things went back then. And then after a little while, we got together with Matt Kaysen, the drummer on the first record, and basically started working on that material and worked on it and rehearsed it for, a few years. And finally, we got to the point that like, shit, it's time to have a demo or something. And so we found somebody that had access to a studio, like an actual, like, studio instead of, everyone's got their computers in their basements, and that's, it basically is a studio essentially. So, we recorded it. We didn't know what we were doing. The guy that was engineering it didn't know what he was doing. That's why it sounds the way it does. It's just like got horrible sound. But it's got some of the songs that ended up on To Kill Is Human. They're ripping songs, but we've got recordings or rehearsal recordings from the time that just bury it. So it's the kind of thing that, like, it'd be nice to maybe have some of that out there instead. Some of it's probably like been traded long ago or whatever, but it doesn't exactly, the demo in particular doesn't really show that lineup in its best light, and even To Kill didn't, but that's the nature of it sometimes.
Do you feel it's much easier of like, recording everything digitally, doing it all in the comforts of your own home and everything?
Yes and no. I take the same approach myself, rather than like, doing a lot of punching in and this and that. And that's not to say that I haven't, or that, there have been times I haven't resorted to it, but I'd much rather just, make a run through it. And, if I have to like come in one place and like do the rest of it or something, stuff like that. But I still have that, I mean, again, I'm old, so I still have that kind of old school mindset. If it was up to me, I would rather be recording it on tape and stuff. But now people don't want to go to that effort, and there's so few people that have the technology, and so it's just that's just how it is now. So, but definitely there's aspects of it that, like, if there's a part that you're just not getting right, then you don't necessarily have to keep going over that part over and over and over again. If there's maybe a part you can copy and paste. So there's definitely aspects that are it is easier, but that's not to necessarily say it's better or anything. Just kind of just is.
Yeah, I get what you mean exactly. Because even on your, like, especially on the first album, we can still hear vocally that you're still kind of young and it's not quite your full voice and you're running out of breath sometimes, whereas the later stuff where it just feels very professional, much stronger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
oh yeah, definitely. Like, that was something that it's always easy. Basically, like, I've always been, you go up on stage and you let it rip and your adrenaline takes over, and that's kind of how it goes. And then you're in the studio and you don't have that, and it's like, fuck, you have to put yourself into that same mindset, and that's not always very easy. And so that's the kind of thing that over the years has been something that I've really worked on, so that I'm able to step into that headspace more easily. And that, actually, coming back a little bit to one of your points, in terms of having the ability to record yourself, we're basically to that point now. The last couple recordings have basically been recorded by ourselves with the assistance of a friend of Simon's who helped record the drums. And basically being able to have that comfortable atmosphere and lack of deadline, lack of pressure, that's huge. And the place that we recorded most of the Drawn and Quarter records, Autopsy Room, that was a pretty chill environment and everything. So it wasn't it wasn't a huge hindrance or something, but it's still it's a big deal having that I guess comfort, you could say, so that you can get mentally where you need to be to make that delivery.
Yeah. Also, one thing, you're a vocalist and you've been doing this since like the 90s, and even metal vocals weren't accepted. I mean, was it hard for you to kind of justify yourself doing those kind of grunts?
Not really, because it was always the style. When we were first starting out, it was completely unfashionable. So it was more just that it was, we were more dismissed altogether than, oh, what are those vocals? And, there'd already been, Morbid Angel on, and had Morbid Angel been on MTV by then? I don't know, but, what was that? It was Covenant. Man. When was that?
I think it was 93. Let me check quickly.
That's what's in my head.
Yeah. Covenant was 93. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure they'd already been had their video on MTV and on Beavis and Butthead by then. So people had already heard. But yeah, I mean, it was more just that, you know, with the exception of stuff like that, even the biggest bands, you know, and actually that was, given that that was 93, that was sort of about the time that things were starting to peak for that wave. And then, you know, a lot of the, even the big bands kind of like went on the skids or something in black metal, but got to be really popular. And a lot of that's great too. But, you know, it was pretty unfortunate timing for starting out with with your first releases.
Yeah, because it's funny because you guys, you know, you had your demos during that kind of time period, but you never really started. I mean, how does it feel to like come, you know, behind all those legendary bands?
Well, we've had those thoughts of, you know, what if we were able to hold together some of those lineups that we had in 93 when we first started working together. And you know, we basically first started doing it to record the Plague Bearer Bubonic Death demo because he'd seen my first performance with my first band and thought that my vocals would suit it. So he basically asked me to do it, and I didn't have anything else to do at that point because the band had fallen apart. And so I said, sure, why the fuck not? And so we probably recorded the demo just, you know, a few months after that, because he had the songs written and lyrics written. And so it was basically just a matter of learning them and then recording them. And the recording sounds killer because it was done in was basically a pro studio, produced by someone that really knew what the fuck he was doing. And we probably played him, you know, albums like Dawn of Possession and Effigy the Forgotten and said, make it sound like this. And so he did. And you know, so it's like tempting sometimes to think of like, you know, what if, but if didn't happen. So it's not much, not too much point in wasting a lot of brain power on that. But, you know, I figure we've, you know, it's just taken a lot of time, but, you know, we're starting to get to the point that more people are taking notice.
Yeah, because you know, you guys really came up in a time where like deathcore wasn't quite a thing, but it was coming in close, and you kind of sandwiched between, you know, really the mainstream commercial death metal kind of stuff and the old school stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, what was going on like mid 2000s, did that affect you?
Well, I mean, what's going on in the mid 2000s in terms of what?
In terms of like, you know, the really chuggy, you know, chuggy chug with no riffs, eyeliner kind of deathcore stuff.
Oh, I mean, that was like, I don't know. That's the kind of thing that, you know, maybe some, you know, a handful of dumbasses aren't going to come to your show because of that. But, you know, everybody pretty much, you know, thought that was crap. So like, you know, the underground scene didn't have a whole lot to deal with from that, I think.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Dawn of Possession, which is quite funny because, you know, your voice reminds me quite a bit of Ross Dolan, you know, especially as it got more mature after the first album, maybe more towards the second or third album where it really got there. And even, you know, a lot of the music is very, you know, sounds like it's based on a lot of Immolation stuff. It was Immolation, the kind of, you know, the mother band to what you guys wanted to do musically.
Well, that's overstating it a bit, but the way I put it is, you know, it was basically that time and kind of like, I figure like Dawn of Possession, Onward to Golgotha, and Altars of Madness, you know, those all really came in pretty quick succession, and they were all kind of, you know, evolutionary or revolutionary in their own ways. And, you know, they kind of made a huge impact when you're starting to kind of, start out and develop what you're playing. And so that's kind of always stuck with us. But there's lots of other influences that seep into, like, there's a lot of Black Sabbath influence that comes in, both, by way of incantation and also directly because Kelly is a huge Black Sabbath fan. And, some, black metal influence from, early Dark Throne and Classic Mayhem. And, they just kind of seeps in various, style thing here or whatever. And, just various, this and that. We, grew up with, Venom, Slayer, Sodom, Possessed, Death, all that stuff feeds into it. And so, also I think that older, a lot of that older influence also helps to, it also comes in and like always trying to keep, keep writing memorable songs.
Yeah. So, you've been doing this for a while. Do you still have the same kind of passion and drive as the early days?
Yes. Other than what life beats out of you. That's what I'd say. It's like, it's not quite the same as when you're, in your early 20s and it's like, well, I don't have this or that or the other thing. It's like, I've got this shitty job and nothing else to do. So it's like, no big deal to like go rehearse 3 or 4 nights out of the week and, basically like, rehearse till after midnight every night. And, then years later, that's just not realistic. So it's things like that. But in terms of like the fire and the drive inside, I'd say if anything, that just keeps building.
So no slowing down from Drawn and Quartered yet.
Nope. No, that's definitely not. I can tell you that.
So, now we live in this weird era where you see 14-year-old children like on a social media posing with all kinds of vinyls and all that, from death metal, old school, all this modern stuff. I mean, how do you feel about this kind of like current trend of death metal that we're in right now?
Well, you kind of touched on a huge, like a few different things. I think it's like, there's definitely, I guess one, it's just a different age. It's just a different age now than when we were first starting out, when the stuff that these albums I'm talking about came out, and that pre-internet, certainly pre-social media, fuck social media, and so it's like it's it's kind of hard, almost hard for me to put into words. Now with the internet, everything's at your fingertips. That's basically it. There's no, you're not really ever waiting for anything because it's always really, it's always leaks right away. You never have to, find anything. Back in the day, you used to have to like trade tapes with people. You used to have to know people and, all that stuff. And it sounds like, obviously now I'm sounding like old man yelling at the clouds here, but so it's just a completely different thing now, with a generation having grown up with this thing where basically you put your entire life on the internet and share it and just think nothing of it. Then there's the whole stamp collector mentality that's going on now, where a lot of people, like you mentioned, are kind of like collecting vinyl and just kind of, it seems like, to post it on the internet, which I do think is stupid. Although, of course, buy our shit, please. So, anyone does really want to buy it just because they want to have it to show off instead of not to play it, have at it. But for fuck's sake, buy a turntable and play your fucking vinyl. So then, I guess, then if you want to talk about the newer era of death metal, I guess, then that's kind of it's completely different, with a lot of really killer bands, and a number also that are sound good, but maybe aren't delivering the goods quite as good, or just aren't really as memorable or whatever, which is how it's always going to be with pretty much anything. And I figure it's awesome. It's I could go, where were all these people years ago? And of course they were all growing up on having listened to this stuff while they were a kid, and so then they could start buying their own shit. But more, I'm just enthused that anyone who gets into death metal is gonna hopefully start checking out more of it, bands' older albums, other bands with the sound, if they enjoy it. So it's only a positive thing in that respect.
All right. So, you were also involved with Vetus Obscurum. So could you please tell us about that?
Well, that Vetus Obscurum was basically a one-off project that was more or less the offshoot of basically us gathering together and drinking a bunch of beers on a few occasions. It was Dario, the old drummer from Drawn and Quartered, and myself, and Nihilist, vocalist, who's a longtime friend of ours that's been involved with a lot of bands, a lot of underground bands like Die Infernal, Abazagarath, Engorged, et cetera, et cetera. And long story short is Dario, who's basically writes a lot of stuff himself, wrote these 4 songs, wrote some lyrics. I wrote a last lyric, and Nihilist and I put down the vocals on it, and that was that. And then was it Divim or Morty decided to put it out on a CD, which was cool. So anybody that's interested should definitely check it out. Kind of Nordic styled, basically.
Yeah, you seem to that's what, because later on, later albums, as well with Drawn and Quartered, vocally you seem to get a lot more of those kind of black metal stylings that come in.
There's been some of that's again, it comes and goes a little bit. It's something that I always kind of do. I feel like when it suits the song, when it suits the atmosphere, and it's actually something that I've been doing since about Extermination Revelry, just to to add a little bit of variety on Horn and Shadows Rise, on The One Who Lurks. I just was working on the vocals on that, and I just seemed to me that it would sound really good with a double high and low, and so that's what I did. And then there's a couple of other things, a couple of things on the new albums, a couple of screams I just basically heard in my head. And so I did my best to do them, and there they are.
All right. I think this is going to be one of my final questions. And, something I've noticed a lot with a lot of, kind of recent death metal, the younger bands, that the vocalist just goes, just does his stuff on top. It just feels like a layer. I mean, for you, what makes a great, vocal death metal, melody?
Well, I mean, I can just speak for myself basically, and my own approach is, and I guess this isn't the case for everything, because some death metal vocal styles are a little more varied in terms of tone, but I generally am going for very low vocals pretty much continuously, and so there's not a lot of variation there. And so to add some to keep it from just being this monotonous thing, then you're more working with the phrasing and the diction and stuff like that. And so that's where I'm like really conscious of how to layer a lyric over the music to make it sound as cool as possible. And so then now I also get to try to figure that out, and also figure out how I'm going to play it at the same time, which has gotten me in a couple of tricky spots, but it's just a challenge. So, but it's cool.
All right. So what else can we expect from Drawn and Quartered?
Well, we have a couple recordings. Well, it's a couple of, let's say it's a handful of songs completed for a couple of projects that'll be coming out. There'll be a split release with Ravenous Death from Mexico, and that's going to be some material of ours it'll be a little bit out of the ordinary, because it's actually kind of a collaboration thing that was written with a friend of ours, and it'll have some guest appearances on it, and basically the bands are kind of doing guest appearances on each other's recordings and that sort of stuff. And then if all goes well, we've recorded another song that's supposed to be planned for a split 7-inch release with Bullet Belt from New Zealand. So hopefully those are going to happen as planned. I think I'm pretty sure the split is moving along and due to come out hopefully on Vomit Records from Mexico. So that it should be something to look forward to. And that's so that's the recorded stuff we've got. We're got a couple of kick-ass live appearances coming up too. We're gonna got an appearance here locally at the Northwest Terror Fest, which is probably the biggest local fest here. And then also we've recently gotten to do we've gotten added to Maryland Death Fest to replace a cancellation, which, great to be fill-in band, but it's going to be awesome to be there and play anyway. We fucking can't wait. So that's going to be very cool. And, obviously we're going to probably look to get more going as soon as possible now that, shows and tours and whatnot are becoming more of a possibility than they have been for a long fucking time. And then, more to come.
All right. That's great. I'm really excited. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick.
Yep. So for anyone listening, you can get Congregation Pestilence on Cruciator Productions out in Europe, and quite a few distros have it in America.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan. All right. Thank you very much. Goodbye.